Season 6 is not a bad season per se, like we have had much worse seasons than this, but I wouldn't call it a good season either. Coming right off the heels of Season 5, one of the best seasons of all time, Season 6 had some pretty heavy competition. Don't get me wrong, I love Season 6, but looking back at it 5.5 years later, it's hard not to acknowledge all the flaws it has, especially when compared to the rest of Chapter 1. Each coming season before this had managed to pretty much one-up itself, and with the bar getting higher and higher, it was inevitable that there would be a drop in quality at some point, and in my opinion, Season 6 just fell flat. But what even happened during this season? I mean, most people only bring up the Flying Island, Fortnite, and most notably the Butterfly event, but there's actually a lot more about this season that largely goes undiscussed nowadays, especially the negative parts.
Oh my god!
Hot take by me, but this might be the worst season of Chapter 1. But before I explain why, we're going to cover Season 6's full timeline of events in meticulous detail, and I mean everything. Storyline, battle pass, map changes, loot pool, new features, LTMs, major glitches. I literally have 23 pages of notes I made for this video. So buckle up, cause this is going to be a long one for sure. Okay, it's September 27th, 2018, and the version 6.0 update just dropped, and with it, Chapter 1, Season 6. As always, the start of the season is normally the most content heavy, and Season 6 is no different, so there's a lot to cover. We'll get to the elephant in the room sooner or later, but first, let's take a look at this season's Battle Pass. One of the best parts about Chapter 1's Battle Passes is that almost all of them tried to implement some kind of new cosmetic. Some becoming major staples of the game, while others are put to the wayside and are pretty much never seen again. For Season 6, we got two new types of cosmetics, pets and music packs. Pets were definitely one of the biggest selling points of the Battle Pass this season, and were used quite a bit in the advertising. They were pretty much just backblings, but with some extra steps. It's pretty ironic that Epic thought that pets would be a big hit, and then come to find out that they only ever made 16 of them in total. Well, 17 if you count Gunner, but he got removed from the game pretty quickly. The last time a pet was released was back in Chapter 2 Season 7, where we got Choppy in that season's Battle Pass. That was over 2.5 years ago. Between that time and now, there have been quite a few backblings that could have definitely been pets, but were never given the chance to do so. So that brings up the question, why did Fortnite stop making pets? Well, I think there's one probable reason why. Pets themselves require a lot more resources to make than backblings. I mean, they have animations for when you pet them, when you're free falling, idle, knocked, or even each time you jump. Not only that, but Fortnite really couldn't figure out how to monetize them successfully. Most of them were given out through battle passes, but the few times they did try to sell them in the shop, it failed miserably. For instance, in Season 8, they tried to sell Empress in the shop for 1,000 V-Bucks. While yes, a lot of work is put into pets, what players saw from this is, they're trying to sell a backbling for $10? Hell no. The fact that pets require a lot of resources to create while never having financial success for Epic leads me to think that this is the reason why they've been abandoned for so long. It's really a shame because some of the later pets were actually really cool. Ohm, for example, is one of my favorite backblings that I run all the time. I mean, there's so much more that they could do with pets now. But they've been put aside for almost 3 years, so I really doubt that they'll ever revisit the idea again. But getting back to the Battle Pass for this season, the other new type of cosmetic we got was music packs. With these being added, you can now listen to different lobby music than just and unlike pets, the addition of music packs was actually a success. Thank God, because a lot of these music packs absolutely slap. I'm probably even playing one as background music right now. But now with the new cosmetic types out of the way, let's go over the new skins. With the season being largely themed around Halloween, the pass was filled with all kinds of spooky cosmetics. At Tier 1, there was two skins, DJ Yonder and Calamity. DJ Yonder is a dope music themed skin with more RGB lights than an average e-girl's PC. I also just realized that the mask has a rod in between the ears, which looks just like a toilet paper roll holder. Now I can't unsee it and neither can you, so you're welcome. Calamity was a sick cowboy skin and probably my favorite from this battle pass. Like previous progressive skins, by leveling up you would unlock more styles that would upgrade her swag the more you play. And like last season, you could unlock her progressive styles even after the season ends. Additionally, you could unlock more colors for her clothes by doing weekly quests. Calamity was an awesome skin, especially when she was maxed out, but she did have one slight issue.
Guys?
When her base style was equipped, she had, how do I put it, breast physics. So when she does emotes like jubilation, that happens. There's no way that this was just a bug or a glitch. This isn't an issue that just naturally occurs. This had to be a calculated effort on someone's part. My guess is that this was likely done as a joke by a rogue developer. Either that or Epic Games was using this as a small test to implement realistic jiggle physics. I don't know what they were expecting, since the player base is primarily a bunch of teenage boys. So of course, people found this pretty quickly and it got fixed soon after. At tier 23 there was Giddy Up, a skin with a stupidly large hitbox but great for trolling. And fun fact, he was the first skin to have a built-in emote. At tier 47 there was Fable, who was a play on Red Riding Hood. Tier 71 has this goth girl vampire Dusk, and tier 86 had... what the fuck even is this skin? Nightshade? Jesus Christ, this is a combination that did not need to be made. At tier 100 there was Dire, kind of an underwhelming tier 100 for me. He was a progressive skin like Calamity, being able to unlock new styles through XP and more colors through weekly quests. I say he's underwhelming because his first style is just Karate Kid Jonesy. His second style is in mid-transformation and makes me want to bleach my eyes out, and the rest of his progressive styles are just furry colors. He just really doesn't scream, "Fear me, mortal scum!" In general, I'm just not really a fan of this battle pass. Calamity was a great skin, DJ Yonder was decent, and Giddy Up was pretty funny. But other than that, all the other skins really weren't that appealing to me, but that's just my preferences. But one last thing about the battle pass was that there were still weekly loading screens, but the story they tell really doesn't matter until later, and it was kinda all over the place. It's pretty much just Fable and Calamity hunting down monsters, and it's implied that Giddy Up freaking dies, so it gets a thumbs up from me. Okay, I think that's it for the battle pass, so I'm gonna shut up about it so we can go over the map changes now. But before I do that, I'm gonna go on a bit of a rant. While researching for this season, I was trying to find a map for this season with POI names on it. So when I look up Season 6 map on Google, this is the first image that shows up. Now, it may look normal, but there's one small issue with it. To my knowledge, Viking Village has never been a named location. Okay, let's see what the Fortnite wiki has to say. It used to be a named location, but was turned into a landmark. When? Trusting my gut, I was not going to take this answer, so I delved way too deep into this. Turns out this map was leaked from the files with the Season 6 update, but was never officially in the game. It was the first map people got a hold of from the files, hence why almost every news source used it. So take this as a cautionary tale. Don't believe everything you see or hear on the internet. It's literally why I'm making these videos. Not only to gather everything into one place, but to riddle out all the misinformation. Anyways, here's the actual map. Unfortunately, we didn't get any new POIs this time around, but there were a few major map changes. First off, Lean Lake is no more, as Kevin reincarnated himself as Loot Lake's house, and it's flying.
I cannot hold it in anymore. I just wanna...
Having a flying POI is such a unique concept, and I think it was executed quite well. There was a cyclone around the island that not only allowed you to fly up to the house, but was also great for rotation. You would think that if you took a chunk out of Loot Lake and threw it up in the sky, it would make the area much worse, but I would say it had the opposite effect. In the place of the island, a hole was left that drained much of the water, making it easier to maneuver as well as had quite a bit of loot. All in all, Loot Lake got a pretty nice facelift. Over at each of the 7 runes that got printed onto the ground last season, the situation has gotten a lot more dire. Purple corruption has spread in a large radius around each spot, and they now spawn shadow stones, but I'll get more into those in a bit. On the mountain west of Haunted Hills, a spooky castle was added. It wasn't great, but it was a welcome addition to the POI. 4 new cabins got added around Wailing Woods, 1 in each of the 4 cardinal directions. Additionally, the center of the maze now has an underground laboratory that seems to be studying rift technology. Wow, that bunker is starting to make a lot more sense now. Over at Fatal Fields, corn is now being grown. Now, this may seem like an insignificant change, but it really altered the interactions at this POI. With the addition of the corn stalks, it allowed you to hide easily, encouraging a more stealthy approach to battles. And as someone who is a dirty little camper that has no skill at this game, this was great for me. Over at Retail Row, the once vacant store has now been converted into the new Halloween store, Hey Boo. Both the Hero Mansion and Villain Lair are starting to age and decay since they've been abandoned after Season 4. As a reference to the story of the Three Little Pigs, 3 1x1 huts made out of builds have been added around the edges of the map. A wooden hut east of Paradise Palms, a brick hut southwest of Greasy Grove, and a metal hut north of Lazy Links. The 7 Moai Eds added from last season got removed, but we got the start of Hut Watch. Last season, while Kevin was making his trek across the map, he destroyed a small hut just a little north of Fatal Fields. And now, as a little side story, it is being rebuilt, now having floorboards, 2 frames, and a finished wall. Unfortunately though, it won't be until 3 seasons later that we'll get to see the saga continue. That's it for map changes, so it's a loot pool in time. Like every season before this, the loot pool remained almost exactly the same. For ARs, there was the Assault Rifle, Burst Assault Rifle, Scoped Assault Rifle, Minigun, Thermal Scoped Assault Rifle, and Suppressed Assault Rifle. For shotguns, there was the Pump Shotgun, Tactical Shotgun, Heavy Shotgun, and Double Barrel Shotgun. For the SMG selection, there was only the Submachine Gun and Compact Submachine Gun. For pistols, there was the Pistol, Suppressed Pistol, Hand Cannon, and Dual Pistols. For snipers, there was the Bolt Action Sniper Rifle, Semi-Automatic Sniper Rifle, Hunting Rifle, and Heavy Sniper Rifle. For explosive weapons, there was the Grenade Launcher, Rocket Launcher, and Guided Missile. For items, there was the Grenade, Bush, Boogie Bomb, Portafort, Klinger, Stink Bomb, Rift to Go, Shockwave Grenade, Grappler, and Portafortress. For healing items, there was the Bandages, Medkit, Shield Potion, Slurp Juice, Small Shield Potion, and Chug Jug. There was also apples and mushrooms that could be foraged around the map as well. For traps, there was the Damage Trap, Launchpad, and Cozy Campfire. And lastly, for vehicles, there was the Shopping Cart and the All-Terrain Cart. That's all for the returning items, but there were some balance changes. The Grappler got nerfed, reducing its uses from 15 down to 10. It was the best mobility item at this time, so I mean sure, why not balance it out a bit? The Double Barrel Shotgun got its damage reduced by 20%. I mean, the Double Barrel, while useless at medium range engagements or farther, could absolutely disintegrate someone up close. So I see why it got nerfed a bit. Even though almost every item returned from the last season, quite a few were vaulted. The loot pool was quite overwhelming at this point. I mean, there were 6 different ARs in the game for crying out loud. So it was really just a necessary evil. The light machine gun got vaulted most likely because we already had a spray focused AR being the minigun. I always thought of the minigun as an SMG, but it's technically classified as an assault weapon, so there's that. The suppressed submachine gun got vaulted and I'm not really quite sure why. The slower fire rate but higher damage made it play quite a bit differently from the other 2 SMGs, especially since they were practically the same weapon, so I don't think it was necessary to remove it. The impulse grenade was vaulted because it was just completely outclassed by the shockwave grenade. Remote explosives got vaulted probably just to remove them. They weren't being used all too much, and I don't think anyone was going to be frothing at the mouth because Fortnite removed remote explosives. And lastly, bouncers were removed because they just kinda sucked compared to literally any other utility item. If they're gonna remove quite a few items, you'd think that we would get something cool in return, right? The new item added this season was the Shadowstone, a forageable item. They could be found on the ground around the 7 corrupted areas I mentioned previously, and because they were forageable, that meant that they couldn't be kept in the inventory. When used, Shadowstones would put you into shadow form. While in this form, your character turns into a semi-transparent ghastly figure, and if you stayed completely still, you would become completely invisible. While in shadow form, you were unable to use items and build, but had increased speed and jump height. You were also very floaty in this state, which allowed you to not take fall damage. Not only this, but it gave you the phase ability that allowed you to dash forward for speed, as well as go through objects. The effects of the Shadowstone would last for 45 seconds, but if needed, could be exited early. Shadowstones were quite a neat item. Not that great, yeah, but they were really fun to play around with. Unfortunately though, Shadowstones were known as being very buggy. There were quite a bit of glitches that could be performed with them, with the most notorious one making you invisible, so they got disabled pretty quickly after release. To wrap things up for the version 6.0 update, Playground was still here as a permanent mode, and the only LTM available was Soaring 50s. And this season's victory umbrella was the Webrella. It's pretty clean and is themed around the season, so that's a win in my books. This first update of the season kinda felt like they did the bare minimum. There was only one new item and it got disabled in like 12 hours, so the map changes were gonna have to carry, which they didn't. No new POIs, just a few major map changes in the flying island. You can argue that Season 4 started pretty similarly, but even then, Season 4 had way more map changes. Plus, it added a way bigger hole to the map. The content this season added just felt lackluster, especially when compared to the seasons previously. But even with the mediocre launch of Season 6, it did get better. I think? The next day, on September 28th, the Porta Fortress got disabled because it turns out that an item that creates a structure the size of your mother destroys server performance. Who would have guessed? On the upside, Shadow Stones returned. Oh wait, never mind, they got disabled again because they were still hella glitchy. On September 29th, the island started moving west. Now, this was really cool. Not only was there a flying POI, but a flying POI that traveled around the map. The only downside was this was just a straight mirror of last season's events. It was going to be a cycle of going to the ruins, transferring power, going on the move again, rinse and repeat 7 times. While having the island fly around changes how certain areas of the map play, it's pretty lame that they decided to do a repeat of the last season. On September 30th, the island arrived at the ruin by Pleasant Park. The rune started floating in the air as Kevin is now absorbing its power, which has caused cube growth to spread into the underground mine area of the island. Not only this, but the tiny craters in the corrupted areas have powered on and now launch you. This, combined with Shadow Stones, made for some crazy movement. On October 2nd, Kevin has finished absorbing the rune's power, causing the rune to fall to the ground, and he started heading south. So pretty much the cycle was 1 day for the island to travel to each rune, and 2 days for Kevin to absorb its power. And each time the rune's craters get powered on, as well as the cube growth spreads farther into the island. On October 3rd, the first update of the season, version 6.01 released, bringing in the new Chiller. It was a common trap that could be placed on walls, floors, ceilings, and ramps. Anyone that gets close enough to it is given an Icy Feet effect for 15 seconds. This made movement very slippery and let you slide around at will. Going downhill with Icy Feet builds a lot of momentum and you can go pretty fast, but going uphill was almost impossible. The Chiller sucks. It's fun for about 5 minutes, but pretty much useless after that. If you use one of these against an enemy, what are you gonna do? Mildly inconvenience them? And if you want to use it for mobility, you gotta be somewhere elevated or you're just screwed. The Chiller was just way too situational. It really didn't have enough applicable uses to justify its existence. Honestly, just a terrible item. For some good news, Shadow Stones' return with the update actually fixed this time. Playground got some matchmaking options to customize the mode, but it got removed right after because of a few issues, although it did get fixed in return the next day. The island has now made it to the second rune by Greasy Grove and is now absorbing its power. And with the extra power, the cubes have spread from the cave area to the base of the island. 2 days later on October 5th, Kevin finished absorbing the rune's power and is now heading east. And a day later, he arrived at the third rune by Fatal and is now absorbing its power. The rune's craters have now been powered on and the cubes have now started to grow into the house's first floor. 2 days later on October 8th, Kevin has finished absorbing rune power and is on the move again, now heading northeast. And a day later, he has arrived at the fourth rune by Retail and started sucking rune dick again. Now the cubes have spread to the second story of the house. On October 10th, the version 6.02 update dropped, and with it, the new quad launcher. It was an explosive weapon that came in an epic and legendary rarity. It was kind of like a weird hybrid between the grenade launcher and the rocket launcher. It had a magazine size of 4 and a decent fire rate, allowing you to spam rockets. The projectiles were much faster than the rocket launchers, but they arced heavily, making it only really useful at short to medium range. The quad launcher was quite a bit weaker than the other explosive weapons, having lower damage, lower structure damage, a smaller blast radius, and a much longer reload time. As a spam weapon, this would be fine, but because it uses rockets, you never had enough ammo to make it worth using. I mean, it had low damage, not making it good against players, it could only one-shot wood builds, it was really ammo inefficient, it wasn't even brain-dead easy to use like any other explosive weapon. The quad launcher was really underpowered. If it got buffed a bit, it could be pretty decent, but it's really just mediocre all around the board. With this update, the Porter Fortress was fixed and returned to the game. Loot Lake didn't get any changes, but its name did change to Leaky Lake, which I think is pretty funny. Kinda an odd choice to wait until now, especially since Loot Lake was actually changed at the beginning of the season. Lastly for this update, we got one of my personal favorite LTMs, Disco Domination. For anyone who has played Garden Warfare, this is pretty much Fortnite Suburbanation. It was originally 2 teams of 50, but later changed to 2 teams of 32. While the storm isn't moving, 5 dance floors spawn at the edges of the circle. The goal was to capture these dance pads, which would idly gain points for your team's dance bar, and whichever team filled their meter first won. But what made this mode interesting was the capture mechanic. To capture these dance floors, you would have to emote on them to raise a disco ball up to its top. You couldn't build on the pad, so when capturing, you were completely exposed while hitting a jiggy. So you either had to build around the dance floor or take out all the enemies in the area to take the point uncontested. There was glider redeploy and for the first time ever, a respawning mechanic which created non-stop action. Disco Domination is by far one of the greatest LTMs I think Fortnite has ever made. It had more of an objective focus, but still managed to be constantly engaging with the multitude of little skirmishes happening all throughout the match. And with the addition of player respawn, it made it so much more fast-paced. Disco Domination was a great LTM, not just because it played so much differently from the main mode, but because player respawn made it very beginner friendly, and I cannot understate that. As someone who really hadn't played many shooters before picking up Fortnite, this mechanic made the game a lot more forgiving and much more enjoyable. Alright, that was a nice break from the island. Let's see where it's at now. The next day, on October 11th, it finished absorbing the power from the rune by retail and is now heading north. And a day later, on October 12th, it arrived to the 5th rune by whaling, and now the cubes is spread into the attic of the house. Also, the guided missile got disabled because I guess combining it with the Shadow Stone and spamming the fire button let you become John Cena. On October 14th, the island was done feeding on the rune by whaling and is now heading west. And a day later, it arrived to the 6th rune by Lazy Lynx and started taking its energy. And with that, the cubes have spread even more into the house. On October 16th, the version 6.10 update released bringing the Quad Crasher, an incredibly fun vehicle. It had 2 seats, a passenger seat where you could build, use items, and emo, and the driver's seat. The Quad Crasher had 400 health and it was a bit slower than the 80k, but more than made up for it with its boost. You could go absolutely flying with it and get some serious airtime. It was so broken in fact that you could fly infinitely with it. That's how insane the boost was. Not only this, but it did a stupid amount of structure damage so you could plow through just about anything. In addition, the Quad Crasher also had a honk button which sounded like, but if you get lucky it would sound like. The Quad Crasher was a great vehicle. Super fun, great for mobility, literally had infinite flight. This thing was the definition of awesome sauce. This update was a little bit bigger than the last few, so we got a few changes with it. East of Junk Junction, a racetrack was added for the Quad Crashers and it worked just like the one in the desert, allowing you to race others and it would time each lap. What's left of the outdoor shop in Tilted that got destroyed by Kevin last season is now being cleaned up and demolished. And it seems that even after Cult took Tomato Head for themselves, Pizza Pit still stands as they are starting up again, but now as a food truck at Tomato Temple. There was also shooting galleries added across the map for a set of weekly challenges. And because the competitive scene was expanding, the events tab was added. So now, official tournaments could be held in-game to satiate the thirst of the pro players. On October 17th, Soaring 50s was removed for some inexplicable reason, and the island finished slurping up the rune energy by Lazy Lynx, and it is now heading south. As a side effect from all the energy the cube gobbled up, it has now started pulsing white. On October 18th, the island has arrived at the 7th and final rune by Dusty Divot and started taking its life force. Also, just completely out of the blue, all 6 of the previous runes rose up from the ground and started levitating. A day later, on October 19th, they started making their way back to the island. Once they had arrived, Kevin took on all 7 of them at once. On October 20th, the island had sucked all of the rune strike, causing them all to fall to the ground, and with a body count of 7, the island made its way back to Leaky Lake. Today, Fortnite also started releasing teasers for this year's Fortniters event, this first one showcasing a first look at the Deadfire skin. For some reason, each one of these teasers also had a poem haiku thing with it as well, which was pretty interesting. This first one reading, "Costumes and dancing. Partner up. be wise. They could be friendly, or a ghoul in disguise. On October 21st, the island made it back to the starting point at Leaky Lake and is now using all the power it's taken to shoot a purple beam into the sky. There was also a second teaser release showing off Deadfire's backbling Shackled Stone as well as another poem. Tombstones quake. Keep your fingers steady. The circle will close. Better be ready. On October 22nd, the third teaser released, this time displaying the new 6-shooter weapon with the poem, Take the shot. If you have enough to last. The wind calls out. Fill your chambers fast. And finally, a day later on October 23rd, we got the final teaser for Fortnite with the poem, The crack of lightning illuminates your winds. Arise, dark ones. The fight begins. On October 24th, the version 6.20 update dropped, bringing the Fortnite event, probably one of the best seasonal events Fortnite has ever put out. A ton of new Halloween skins, good map changes, new items, a fantastic LTM. For how much they hyped it up, they did not disappoint. The first thing to go over was the Fortnite LTM. During matches, cube fragments would spawn around the map with larger ones spawning around the corrupted areas. These fragments spawned hordes of cube fiends, but when destroyed, they would drop loot. The cube monsters also dropped loot as well as gave shields when destroyed. So the more powerful the cube fiend, the more shield they would give and the better loot that they would drop. This little bit of PvE was actually pretty fun, having to not only worry about other players but an army of cube zombies. Though I will say it was pretty annoying at the end of matches when you were constantly getting third-partied by the Legions of Hell. Even then, I really liked this LTM, but there was a slight issue that made it very controversial. Normally LTMs get their own separate playlist, but for Fortnite they instead swapped it out for the main game mode, forcing you to play with zombies enabled. Now, this pissed off a lot of people, and rightfully so. Many people just found the zombies really annoying to deal with, and because they implemented the LTM this way, there was no alternative. So pretty much anyone who takes the game seriously got completely screwed over for a week. Nice! With the version 6.20 update, the pumpkin launcher returned from last year, replacing the rocket launcher, and we got two new weapons. Firstly, there was the Fiend Hunter crossbow, which was exclusive to the Fortnite event. Unlike every other seasonal weapon, which is just a reskin, the Fiend Hunter crossbow was actually a semi-unique weapon. It came in an epic rarity and functioned as a reworked crossbow. It had no scope and less damage, but a much faster fire rate and a few more bolts in its magazine. So they basically managed to make the crossbow even more dog shit than it was before. But fortunately, this thing was not designed to fight players. You might have been able to tell from the name, but this thing shreds cube fiends. It has a 4x damage multiplier on the cube zombies, making it stupidly good against them. And you gotta remember, it has infinite ammo, which made it by far the best weapon to farm zombies. This was a really great way to repurpose this pretty awful weapon and actually make it useful in another way. I mean, you'd probably lose to someone with a pickaxe, but at least you'd feel like Doomslayer with how fast you could drop the undead. The second weapon that got added was the revolver. It used medium ammo and came in an uncommon, rare, and epic rarity. This revolver was semi-automatic, and as you can guess by the name, it had a magazine size of 6 bullets. What was cool about it was that it had two fire methods. When aiming down sights, it had a slow fire rate but high accuracy like the revolver, and when hip firing, it worked completely opposite, having a high fire rate but terrible accuracy, and I mean really bad. Unless you were practically breathing on your opponent, you were not hitting a shot. This could be a fine weapon, but it did like no damage. For being a revolver weapon, it doesn't do much more damage than just the regular pistol. Combining that with the horrendous accuracy, this thing really wasn't worth your time. The 6-shooter having two fire modes was a really great idea that had a lot of potential, but it was just executed extremely poorly. Last thing to touch on for the loophole changes, both the guided missile and porta fortress were fixed and got re-enabled into the game. For the map changes, the battle bus is now fully decorated for Halloween and plays a bangin' remix of Electro Swing. The flying island has now split into 5 pieces from Kevin's power, with the house being separated as well. Kevin is now floating in the middle of all this chaos, still powering the portal driving the cube invasion. Over at Fatal Fields, the whole POI has been converted into a horror attraction. One cornfield has been turned into a maze, and the other has been trimmed into the shape of a scary face. Even a few of the buildings have been converted into haunted houses. I don't know what the bus driver takes before matches, but without fail, they always crash the bus on a hill by shifty shafts. But with this update, the bus driver changed it up and is now crashing the bus by lazy links, which, fun fact, can be seen in the Fortnite trailer. The Pizza Pit food truck has arrived at Greasy Grove and is now in front of the Durr Burger restaurant. This isn't friendly competition anymore. Oh no, there's some malicious intent. On the back of the truck is a container full of roaches, and I'm sure you can tell where this is going. With this update, Playground also got some extra content. Like the Spiky Stadium that was added last season, a lot more minigame things got added. And I really do not care enough to go into detail about it, but thought I should just mention it. Replacing the main game mode with an LTM may have been a dumb decision, but it pales in comparison to what they did next. Ever since the Soaring Solos and Soaring 50s modes introduced Glider Redeploy, it has been a mainstay in almost every LTM since then. I mean, it's a great feature. Faster rotation makes a faster paced game, making a more fun match. Everyone loved it. The obvious next move was to put it into regular matches. So starting now and lasting for a few weeks, Fortnite tested Glider Redeploy. Glider Redeploy is a fun feature, I'm not disagreeing with that, but adding it in completely offsets the balance of the entire game. First of all, some items become much better than before, and some items become completely obsolete. For example, items like launch pads and riftigos become much less useful because you could just build up and glide that way. And items like shockwave grenades and grapplers now give way more mobility because of Glider Redeploy. Most of the time you didn't even need a utility item because Glider Redeploy made running from fights stupidly easy. Another big issue is that at this time, people were really discovering the potential of the game's building mechanics. 90s, ramp rushing, and turtling, just to name a few techniques. And this caused a lot of concern that building would become too powerful. But to specifically counter this, items like the compact SMG or heavy sniper get added, which evens the playing field. But by far what balances Fortnite's building mechanics the most is its risk and reward factor. You can build as high as you want, but if someone breaks you down, it's over. Unless you prepare ahead of time or have a getaway item, you'll almost always take fall damage. But with Glider Redeploy, this risk entirely vanishes, making it almost impossible to die from height, and in consequence buffing sweaty tryhards. Which is definitely not a good thing. Because of the reasons I mentioned, the Glider Redeploy test became heavily criticized. I'm glad that they tried something new, but this small change completely altered how the game is played and definitely not for the better. Sure, getting around the map was easier than ever, but it completely changed mobility and made building way too powerful. This was just a test phase, so it wasn't permanent, but it would be up to the community's feedback on whether or not it would stay. Getting back to the cube now, on October 26th, cracks have started to form on the top of the cube, with them spreading farther and farther by each passing day. On October 27th, the cracks have spread to 3 of the edges. On October 28th, cracks have now spread to all of the edges. On October 29th, the cracks are starting to spread inward, and on October 30th, the cube is now almost completely covered in cracks. On November 1st, the version 6.21 update dropped, bringing the new balloon item. It came in an epic rarity and allowed you to fly into the sky. They dropped in a stack of 20, and when used, it would blow up a balloon which would be held in your hands, disabling the use of items and building. You could use up to 6 at a time, and the more you used, the lighter you would become before eventually floating into the sky. You could go all the way to the build limit, but if you stayed up there for too long, your balloons would start popping, lowering you back to the ground. Your balloons could also be popped with bullets, so you had to be wary of flying too high. You can remove balloons one at a time if needed, but you had to be careful because depending on how fast you were falling, you could still take fall damage, even if you still had some balloons left. These were fun to use, but really didn't have any other use other than that. They weren't great for mobility and couldn't stop fall damage consistently. Plus, you moved super slow and were completely defenseless while using them, practically making you a moving target. I won't lie, flying to max height was pretty amusing, but other than that, they really didn't have many substantial uses. That's what I would say, but Glider Redeploy made balloons really good. If you were shot down, you didn't have to worry about fall damage because you could just glide back down to safety. Not only this, but you could just float up to max height and deploy your glider to just fly across the map for some insane mobility. Balloons by themselves were a terrible item, but with Glider Redeploy, they were much better. With this update, quite a few weapons got vaulted. The dual pistols got removed most likely because they weren't being used too often, and same can be said for the semi-auto sniper. The guided missile was removed as well, either for balancing reasons or because of how easily it could break the game with glitches. Unfortunately, this would be the last time ever that we would see the guided missile. It stayed in Playground for a bit, but was later removed and completely erased from the game files, meaning it will probably never return. Sure, it may have been overpowered, maybe it didn't fit well with the state of the game, but it's honestly one of the most fun and unique weapons Fortnite has ever put out, and now it's lost to time. It sucks to see 3 weapons vaulted, especially the guided missile, but that wasn't even the worst part about this update. I think it's time for another controversial change. Why? Like, genuinely, why? Who thought that this was a good idea? Sure, you may want to find a way to nerf builds, but this was just a brain-dead decision. The point of building is to quickly make cover to stop yourself from taking damage. Having 25% of explosive damage bleed through builds just defeats its purpose. If someone shoots a rocket launcher at your cover, you're still gonna take 30 damage. It's absolutely mind-boggling to me that they thought this was a viable solution. A solution to a problem they just made 10 times worse with glider redeploy. I guess we'll see how long this lasts for. With the version 6.21 update, we got a couple of map changes as well. For the Halloween season, some objects around the map have become possessed and started levitating. Giant pianos have been added in a few places and would play notes when stepped on. And over at Greasy Grove, the Der Burger restaurant has closed due to the roach infestation from Pizza Pit's sabotage. And now Pizza Pit has taken Der Burger's customers on their own turf. This is exactly why I've always been on Team Der Burger. They would never stoop this low. Lastly for this update, they added a really weird feature. If you played on PC and used in-game voice chat, your Fortnite skin's mouth would sync up to your voice in the lobby. It's honestly a little uncanny and it kind of freaks me out. I don't like it. On November 2nd, the explosive bleed damage was removed because of all the backlash it caused, and the next day on November 3rd, something strange was happening with the cube. There was a mini event where the cube imploded and a chunk of it fell off. It then started emitting a purple fog and was leaking some kind of ooze. There was finally a conclusion to all this buildup as on November 4th, we got the Butterfly Live event. During the event, the last of Kevin's essence drained from him and dropped into Leaky Lake's hole. The cube then started spinning and turning white while shooting out chains of lightning. The cube spun faster and faster and glowed even brighter before exploding and turning the screen white. It then faded to reveal that everyone is floating around in some kind of in-between dimension. A big rift was overhead, turning itself into a butterfly. It then flew around the player for a bit before landing on their finger, rifting them back over Leaky Lake to see the after effects from the explosion. The island collapsing has made the area more grassy and parts of Kevin have landed in the center. And to symbolize the darkness that was defeated, a rainbow sat over the POI and the Fortnitemares LTM was changed back to the regular game. Now that event was sick, but it was also really short, having a runtime of like 3 minutes. It was truly a spectacle. I wouldn't say better than the Rocket event. I think that was a lot more fun to watch, but the cinematic value it had was amazing. Unfortunately, Epic didn't learn from their mistake last time with the Rocket event, and because it was in a regular match, it was still possible to grief lobbies. Especially with how infamous it was during the Rocket event, it really should have been fixed, either by disabling weapons or letting people watch it in Playground. But besides that little issue, this was a pretty good event. On November 6th, the version 6.22 update dropped and gave us the heavy assault rifle. It used medium ammo and came in a rare, epic, and legendary rarity. It worked similarly to the AR and was fully automatic. Its gimmick being increased damage by having a slower fire rate with much worse accuracy and recoil. This was a good AR for doing damage to players, but because of its low fire rate, it was pretty bad against structures, unlike most other ARs. Additionally, the crazier recoil and worse accuracy made it only really suitable to fight at medium or close range. I like the heavy AR because of the few shots that I actually hit, I do really good damage. But for someone who can aim better than a chimpanzee, the burst AR or just regular AR outclasses it in DPS. But for an AR, it's pretty solid, maybe just a little underpowered. This update marked the end of the Halloween festivities, so the battle bus was reverted and the pumpkin launcher was changed back to the rocket launcher. Even though the Fiend Hunter crossbow was exclusive to the Fortnite event, it stayed a little while longer because of the new LTM added this update. Disco Domination was removed, Blitz returned, and the new Team Terror LTM was added. It was the Fortnite LTM, but this time with 2 teams of 32. The only new thing it really added was the chance for gold cube fiends to spawn that would drop legendary loot. This was definitely the definitive Fortnite experience, as with a bigger team size, it was much easier to deal with the cube zombies. For map changes, the Hey Boo store and Retail Row closed, and the haunted attractions at Fatal Fields have been reverted back to normal. Because Kevin is now 6 feet under, the corrupted areas are now starting to be taken back over by vegetation. In Retail Row, a new sign for the Nom store has been put up because the last one, if you remember, ended up by Risky Reels. At Paradise Palms, a PC cafe called Keyboard King opened to coincide with some exclusive challenges only available to South Korea and I think China. They require you to play at select PC cafes, which could earn you some free V-Bucks and even a contrail. At Pleasant Park, the soccer field has been converted into a football field for an NFL collab, and lastly, the Durburger restaurant is now completely boarded up and shut down. But not all hope is lost. Durburger 2 created a food truck to compete with Pizza Pit, kicking off a huge rivalry. On November 8th, the secret skin AIM was released. Not only a sick skin, but the first teaser for Season 7. If you look at his legs, they are covered in frost. And from the loading screen, it reveals that he is a recon scout from some wintry area. Also in the loading screen, you can see that he landed at Flush Factory, and the parachute he left on the building can actually be seen in-game. On November 9th, we got some LTM swapped out. Team Terror stayed, but Blitz was removed and swapped out for Disco Domination. A day later, on November 10th, the rivalry between Durburger and Pizza Pit continued as both the food trucks arrived at the indoor soccer stadium. On November 14th, the 6.30 update released bringing the new mounted turret, yet another mediocre trap item. It came in a legendary rarity and could only be placed on floors. When placed down, you would have to enter and exit the turret like a vehicle. It could turn 360 degrees, had unlimited ammo, and was fully automatic, but if you fired the gun for too long, it would overheat and have a 3-second cooldown time. As long as you shot it in bursts, it was pretty easy to stop that from happening, as you could shoot it for 10 seconds straight. It had pretty decent damage and a fast fire rate that could especially melt builds, but it did leave you pretty exposed while using it. If you placed it where it couldn't be knocked down though, the turret had a ridiculous amount of health, making it very hard to destroy. I feel like they were really trying to turn anything into a trap at this point. What if we make a trap for mobility? Boom, launchpad. How about a healing item as a trap? Boom, cozy campfire. You know what? Let's just take a fucking gun and strap it to a floor. While the mounted turret was actually pretty decent, it just felt really unnecessary. It had great damage output, sure, but why would you use this over any other gun? The mounted turret did have some nasty damage output, but with the drawback of locking you in place, which not only means you're a sitting duck, but if whoever you're shooting at leaves your line of sight, it becomes completely useless. And with this being a rare item, by the time you managed to get a hold of one in a match, you probably had a loadout of weapons that could do the same purpose, but better. The mounted turret was a good item, but it really didn't have enough versatility in many situations. With the version 6.30 update, there were some more changes to the pool of LTMs. Disco Domination stayed and Team Terror was removed, as well as the Fiend Hunter crossbow with it. The side story with the bickering restaurants wasn't for nothing as we got the new Food Fight LTM, my favorite LTM ever. In this mode, there were 2 teams of 12, and a giant wall dividing them. On each side of the wall, there was a fort with either the Tomato Head or Durburger depending on which team you were on. Additionally, each base had mounted turrets pre-placed on them that have special designs for each team, which was really cool. Not only this, but your skin's head would be replaced by your team's mascot, which made for some really goofy combinations. Each team's mascot had 200,000 health, and the goal was to destroy the other teams first. Each fort was made of just supports, so each team would have 5 minutes before the wall falls to loot up and create cover for their mascot. The great part about this LTM was that you really had to work as a team, but you were able to do your part in many ways. There had to be people rushing the base, people defending, and even people repairing the fort. It actually required a little bit of strategy. Respawn and glider redeploy was enabled, so there was non-stop action. I played a crap ton of Food Fight when it first came out, and I'm not alone, as it's become a bit of a fan favorite LTM among the community. I would absolutely lose my shit if Food Fight ever returned. I mean, with LTM starting to make a comeback in Chapter 5 with Ketch and Floor's lava returning, it's still a possibility. For the other part of this update, we also got a couple of map changes. The food trucks have moved again and are now at Pleasant Park. Also, remember those 4 cabins that got added to Wailing Woods at the beginning of the season? Well, they got an interesting change. The research lab underground seems to have refined the rift technology and have created portals that teleport to and from each of the 4 cabins. Also, I don't know how I never knew this, but the pickaxe used to only do 10 damage to players, so it was really only useful for committing property damage. But with this update, it was buffed to the 20 damage we know today, making it much easier to kill people or finishing knocked players. The glider redeploy test concluded this day, and because Fortnite listened to the community feedback, it was removed. Something modern Fortnite would never do, because they wanted to shove the most corporate, unusable dog shit UI down my goddamn throat. On November 15th, a hotfix happened which added some small updates to the game. The mounted turret had its floor health nerfed from 5,000 to 1,000 health, and the turret health nerfed from 800 to 400 health, making it a lot less beefy. In Food Fight, the mascot health was reduced from 200,000 to 100,000 because the games were taking way too long. On November 18th, the food trucks moved from Pleasant Park and are now at Haunted Hills. And south of Flush Factory, a white cloud seems to be approaching the island and would grow closer each day, later revealing itself to be an iceberg. And if you connect the dots, that must be where AIM is from. On November 20th, there was a content update for version 6.30 bringing the new dynamite item. It came in an uncommon rarity and was an explosive item similar to grenades. The difference being that they had a longer fuse time of 5 seconds but a much bigger explosion radius. The explosion would do 60 damage to players and 800 structure damage. This would be a pretty bad item, but you can cook it in your hand and whittle down the fuse before throwing it to make it a lot more consistent. But if you held onto it for too long, it would blow up in your hand, so there was a little bit of a risk factor. This was a pretty good item, and this one feature made it have a very fun learning curve. You could just spam it and destroy any structure, or, with some patience, take out opponents. Its multitude of uses actually made it quite useful. For the LTMs this time around, Food Fight stayed and Disco Domination was removed, and to coincide with the addition of Dynamite, we got the Wild West LTM. It was just the regular mode, but this time with an American loot pool. For weapons, there was the pump, double barrel, 6-shooter, and hunting rifle, and for items there was the Dynamite, bandages, medkits, slurp juice, and cozy campfire. An interesting LTM, but that's about it. And lastly for the content update, the mounted turret got nerfed again. The headshot multiplier was lowered from 2 to 1.5, reducing the headshot damage from 80 to 60. And also the time to overheat was lowered down from 10 seconds to 6 seconds. I mean, full auto for 10 seconds was a little ridiculous. On November 21st, the food trucks have moved from Haunted Hills to the Quadcrasher racetrack by Junk Junction. And we got the most random collab. During matches for a short moment at Risky Reels, Wreck-It Ralph would wave and walk across the screen to promote the second Wreck-It Ralph film releasing the same day. And coincidentally in that film, Fortnite has a brief cameo in it. I love the first Wreck-It Ralph movie, but the sequel might have to be one of the worst pieces of cinema I've ever seen. It literally took all the character development and interesting story from the first movie and threw it off a 4-story building to make the most generic plot and shove a billion references in your face. But at least we got a free emote out of it. I mean, can't go wrong with that. On November 24th, the food trucks moved from the Quadcrasher racetrack to the motel, and 2 days later on November 26th, they arrived at Lazy Links.
So I gave my sermon an urban kick. My rhymes are fly, my beats are sick.
On November 27th, version 6.31, the final update released dethroning the spray meta and bringing back our Lord and Savior, the One Pump. Ever since shotguns were nerfed in the latter half of Season 4, none of them were able to one-shot. And afterward, absolutely busted weapons like the drum gun and compact SMG were added, spiraling the game into a spray meta for about half a year. But now, the reign is over as all shotguns now hit at least 3 pellets, increasing the minimum damage, and there is the addition of the epic and legendary pump shotguns. They worked identically to the lower rarity versions, but like the AR and burst AR, they had different weapon models. Not only this, but the uncommon and rare versions got a 15 damage buff each. So now the rare, epic, and legendary versions of the pump shotgun could all one-shot. This was absolutely massive for the game and made the meta more skillful, nerfing controller players worldwide. The only downside to this was that the pump had arguably been the best shotgun, and with the buff it got, the other ones got completely left in the dust. Dynamite got an update as well, allowing you to pick it up and rethrow it. A nice little feature that allowed for some counterplay if people weren't too careful when using it. For the LTMs this time around, both Food Fight and Wild West were removed and high explosives returned. There was also the addition of everyone's favorite LTM, Team Rumble. It was pretty obvious that players really liked the fast-paced gameplay of Disco Domination and Food Fight with player respawn and glider redeploy, so it was obvious to make a game mode like those but without all the gimmicks. In this mode, there were 2 teams of 20 and the first team to get 100 kills won. It was that simple. And to say people liked it would be an understatement. I mean, for God's sake, it's still in the game to this day. While nowadays it's nothing more than a laughingstock, back then, it was pretty awesome. The last thing for this update was that for a limited time of 1 week, gifting had its first test run. It only worked for item shop cosmetics and it required both the gifter and giftee to have 2FA enabled. When gifting items, you could choose between 4 gift boxes and even write a special message with it. Being able to have people buy each other cosmetics is not only a nice quality of life feature, but it made Epic a lot more money. On November 28th, the food trucks moved from Lazy Links and are now at Risky Reels. On November 30th, they moved to Tomato Temple, and on December 2nd, they arrived at Dusty Diner. On December 3rd, we got the first teaser for Season 7 reading, A Bitter Ice Spreads. We got a first look at the Ice King, but also on his shoulder is a teaser for Lynx as well as the hoverboard. On December 4th, the second teaser released reading, A Frigid Day Dawns. In this one it was a closer look at Lynx, but behind her you can see a glimpse at Zenith as well as a teaser for ziplines. Also, as the iceberg got closer, it started snowing on Spawn Island. December 5th was the last day of the season, giving the third teaser for Season 7 reading, Ascend to New Heights. We got a closer look at Zenith as well as a teaser for Plains. And lastly, there are now northern lights that can be seen in the sky above the iceberg.
I am rectangular.
There we go. I think that was the entirety of Season 6's history, lasting a total of 70 days. Season 6 is one of the first few seasons I played, so I have a lot of nostalgia for it. As much as 7th grade me wants to say how good the season is, it's just really not. Compared to the last 2 seasons where it really felt like the game was being pushed past its limits, Season 6 just felt really underwhelming, the loot pool especially feeling really lackluster. There are some good additions like the Quad Crasher and Heavy AR, but most of the new additions had no purpose or were severely underpowered. The Chiller sucks, the Quad Launcher sucked, Balloons suck, the 6-shooter sucks. Do you see where I'm going with this? It was early Fortnite, so you still had a crazy loot pool, but this season really diminished it. Another weak point to this season was the main map changes, or particularly lack of. The castle at Haunted Hills and research base at Wailing Woods was really cool to see, and we did get Leaky Lake as a new POI, but that was about it. If you compare the map from the end of the season to Season 5's map, there's very few discernible differences. By far, my favorite part about the Chapter 1 map is that with each season, all the crazy map changes keep on adding up, really showing the evolution of the map. But you could take out Season 6 and it would barely change anything. The one saving grace of Season 6 was the Flying Island. It was not only impressive, but a really fun location. But even this edition had shortcomings, which brings up my final point. The pacing this season was horrendous. Season 6 didn't have the strongest start, but Kevin's shenanigans started up almost immediately. Having a POI move around the map was really awesome to see, but felt partially uninspired because it was just repeating the events of the Cube last season. But I will say this was a great lead up to the Fortniters event. Definitely the highlight of the season. There was cube monsters, new items, new cosmetics, spooky map changes. They did a really great job setting the tone. It was fantastic. And to end it all off with a butterfly event was crazy. While not the most insane event we've seen, it was a very good second live event and fantastic send-off for Fortnitemares. My problem with this was that the end of Fortnitemares was only halfway through the season. Putting the climax right in the middle of the season I think was a very poor design choice. Not only this, but having the Flying Island, the main selling point of the season, getting blown up was definitely not a good play. If you've ever taken an English class before, you're probably pretty familiar with a plot diagram. You've got exposition and rising conflict that builds up to the climax, the main conflict or turning point. Afterward being the falling action and resolution. The biggest rule of thumb being that the climax needs to be later in the story as to build suspense and keep people excited for what's to come. If the climax is too early, the latter part of the story becomes uninteresting because you already saw the best part, so why bother seeing the rest of it? This is what I believe to be Season 6's biggest problem. First of all, there was almost no time to get acquainted with the season because literally the second day of the season, we got thrown right into the action. While having the storyline correlate with Halloween was really cool, it caused the build-up to feel very rushed. It, in consequence, led to the main conflict of Season 6 being directly in the middle of the season, causing the second half to be very uninteresting. Sure, there was an iceberg, but that pales in comparison to fighting cube zombies and being transported to another freaking dimension. So for the next month, you are pretty much stuck staring at fog in the distance and, here's dynamite, I guess. This season wasn't all bad though. There was the flying island, a great Halloween event and live event, One Pump came back, the Quadcrasher was an insanely fun vehicle, and they absolutely cooked with the LTMs. Like Disco Domination and Food Fight are my all-time favorites. But even with all the positives about this season, it just didn't hit the mark. Especially with the standards that have been set by the past few seasons. And in my opinion, it's probably the weakest season from Chapter 1. This season just felt like they were throwing anything and everything at the wall to see if it stuck. Sure, some things hit, but when you're shooting in the dark, you're bound to miss a lot of shots. Does this season suck? Yes. Do I hate this season? No. Quite the opposite. I may have just talked shit about Season 6 for the past hour, but that doesn't change the fact that I had fun playing it. All the criticism I give is out of love and respect for the game. I just think it's important to analyze the whole picture and point out the good and bad when many people don't. So, whether you loved or hated Season 6, let me know in the comments. I like seeing what others have to say. And if you're somehow still here for some reason, thanks for watching my garbage. But before I disappear for another 4 months, I got a few last minute things. Firstly, thank you for 300 subscribers. For how little I upload, I should not have this many, so thank you for that. Secondly, I got a Twitter now, so if you want more shenanigans from me, or just want to dox me, there will be a link in the description for that. Make sure to dislike the video and write a really mean comment, and I'm gonna stop yapping now. Bye.